for peace over the years, especially through United for Peace and Justice. So we're very proud and happy to be here with you all today. One of our speakers for the workshop is not yet here. I'm not sure if he's having some trouble finding the campus or not. We were going to have him go first, which is why we're kind of stalling for time up here. But we really do hope that he comes because he's a very special young man from the occupied Gaza Strip, whose two brothers were killed recently in January. And he has a very heart-wrenching but also powerful story to tell. If he doesn't make it here this afternoon, he is scheduled to speak at the event tonight, so if you don't get to hear him here this afternoon, hopefully you'll get a chance this evening. But what I wanted to do for a few minutes, I'm going to sit down, if that's all right. Okay. So I'm going to work this as we go through this. We'd like to talk to you about some of the different areas of work that the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation is doing, specifically related to changing U.S. policy towards Israel-Palestine to support human rights, international law, and equality for everyone. I'm going to talk about some of the things we're doing to challenge our country's policy of providing military aid to Israel, how that's involved in human rights abuses against Palestinians, and what you all can do to get involved in our campaign to help challenge military aid. So without further ado, I have this PowerPoint presentation, and if anyone's interested in a copy of this, it can be downloaded from our website or see me afterwards. I'm happy to give you my card, and I'm happy to email you the presentation as well. But we call it Armed and Dangerous: Arms Transfers to Israel during the Bush administration. And just from the outset, let me say that although there's plenty to pick on the Bush administration about for its record, this is not a policy that's specific to the Bush administration. This, of course, is a long-standing policy of sending highly advanced weapons to Israel. So to give you a little bit of background on the issue.
Can we turn the lights off?
Sure. To give you a little bit of background on the issue, between 1949 and 2007, the United States has provided a little bit more than $100 billion in total aid to Israel. And for the last few decades, the aid has been distributed in 10-year increments under a memorandum of understanding, which is negotiated between whichever president is in office at the time and the State of Israel. Now, something important to know about U.S. aid to Israel is that over the previous memorandum of understanding, which ended in 2008, actually it ended in 2007, but it ended with the 2008 budget year. What happened over that previous 10 years is that Israel and the United States made an agreement to phase out economic aid. They stepped it down every year in favor of stepping up military aid, so that by the end of that 10-year memorandum of understanding, the United States is providing all of its aid to Israel in the form of weapons. In August 2007, Under Secretary of State Nicholas Burns, at the time, negotiated a new memorandum of understanding with Israel to increase military aid to $30 billion over this current MOU, which runs through 2018, which is an average increase of 25% per year over where the levels of military aid were when that last MOU ran out in 2008. So it's quite a substantial increase in military aid. In 2010, this budget year, the first one that President Obama sent to Congress, it included $2.775 billion in military aid, or in budget terms, what's known as FMF, which stands for Foreign Military Financing. That's the budget term for military aid. Congress has almost gone through the entire appropriation process for this budget year. The House has passed its version of the budget. The Senate is still working on it. I don't believe they finished it before they left town for their August recess yesterday, or today actually.
What is that number?
The 2.775 billion,
Is that what it is?
2.775 billion in the 2010 budget. Yes. So let's get into the numbers a little bit.
Before you do that, can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
It's my understanding that the restrictions that the United States puts on foreign aid to other countries are not the same as the restrictions put on the foreign aid to Israel.
That's a good question. The restrictions are the same. There are some things that Israel gets specially that most other countries don't get. In fact, Israel and Egypt are the only countries, for example, that get their military aid, all of it, within the first 30 days after the budget's passed. But in terms of how the weapons are used, and I'll get into that in a minute in the presentation, the same restrictions that apply to every other country also apply to Israel. So there were three major components of military aid to Israel during the Bush administration. The most important in terms of amounts was foreign military sales. And those came to just a little bit more than $25 billion during the Bush administration. The second biggest component are what's known as direct commercial sales. FMS is a program that's administered by the Pentagon. DCS is a program that's administered by the State Department. So it's different licensing procedures, it's different agencies that are involved, and it's also different weapons that are involved in each program. And then the third component of military aid to Israel is what's known as EDA, or Excess Defense Articles. That's kind of like the Pentagon's garage sale, if you will. When they have equipment that they don't need or want anymore, they sell it to other countries at a very reduced price. So that totaled about $36 million over the course of the Bush administration. And there's the grand total, a little bit over $31 billion. Now I will say that foreign military sales are not actually weapons deliveries, they're contracts for weapons. So a big part of that relates to the future transfer of fighter jets, which are not yet built. So let's look a little more closely at the numbers. You can see how the biggest component of the military aid breaks down in terms of different weapon systems. You can see that most of it is devoted to aircraft, which came to almost $20 billion. That includes the F-35 Joint Strike Fighters, the next generation of attack fighters. Lots of billions of dollars worth of jet fuel, actually, and some other aircraft there as well. Second biggest component of that was different missiles and munitions. You can see the various different ones. That amounted to almost $3 billion. Naval was actually a big component of it, and we'll talk in a minute about how the Israeli Navy is committing human rights abuses with these weapons. There was a $2 billion contract signed for the next generation of naval combat ships. And then the U.S. Army does some construction of infantry bases for the Israeli military. Different vehicles. And then you have miscellaneous, which we couldn't quite put in the other categories, which involve missile defense mostly. So that's the biggest component, foreign military sales. And that was the program administered by the Pentagon. This is the one that's administered by the State Department. It usually includes smaller types of weapon systems, not the big ticket items like the fighter jets and naval ships and so forth. But you can see that a lot of these had to do with aircraft's parts and